and this is not, this doesn't make me happy anymore, the situation. So I left to hopefully do it on my own.
But it would be nothing, nothing. No!
Soul music isn't just something you hear, it's something you feel. Born from the blood, sweat, and soul of Black America, it carried messages of love, pain, freedom, and resistance. But behind the velvet voices and gold records were personal wars, backstage betrayals, and silent battles for survival. These weren't just rivalries. They were collisions of greatness shaped by a system that thrived on division and control. Marvin versus Teddy, Aretha versus Diana, James versus everyone. Otis versus the ghost of a man he respected but never truly met in battle, Sam Cooke. Each story reveals the cost of genius in a world that demanded perfection but rarely gave peace. These weren't feuds fueled by fame alone. They were forged in an industry that asked artists to compete, conform, and carry entire communities on their backs. And yet, out of that struggle came music that changed the world. But how much did it cost them? And if these icons had been allies instead of adversaries, what more could soul music have become? Let those questions echo as the records spin. Because behind every soul classic is a story, and sometimes a wound. In the early days of soul, competition wasn't just natural, it was by design. Labels like Motown and Stax became pressure cookers, pushing artists to outshine not only their rivals, but even their own label mates. Behind the polished performances and chart-topping hits were silent battles over image, airplay, and the dream of crossing over in a divided America. Who really got the spotlight, and who was left behind? What did these artists have to sacrifice just to be seen? The rivalries ran deeper than you think, and some never healed. Watch to uncover the truth behind soul's fiercest battles. Marvin Gaye and Teddy Pendergrass were two towering figures in soul music, each with a velvet voice and a magnetism that turned them into icons of sensuality and emotional depth. Their vocal styles, while distinct, often drew comparisons. Gaye's smooth, introspective delivery, infused with vulnerability and social consciousness, contrasted with Pendergrass's husky, commanding baritone, which radiated raw masculinity and bedroom allure. Both became symbols of soul's seductive power, and both were idolized by fans who saw them as the embodiment of romantic desire. As their careers peaked in the 1970s, the music industry, always eager to capitalize on competition, began pitting them against each other. Marvin Gaye, the Motown veteran with a long track record of hits and artistic evolution, was seen as the cerebral soulman, especially after the success of What's Going On. Teddy Pendergrass, the breakout star from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, who forged a solo path with back-to-back platinum albums, was painted as the new sex symbol in town. With his infamous women-only concerts and smoldering stage presence, Pendergrass was marketed as the heir, or threat, to Gaye's throne. Beneath the surface, both men were battling personal demons that complicated their careers and heightened the tensions. Gaye struggled with depression, drug use, and deep-seated trauma, while Pendergrass dealt with the pressures of sudden fame, label politics, and later the life-changing car accident that left him paralyzed. Industry insiders and media outlets often fueled the rivalry with speculation and subtle comparisons, framing their successes as either-or scenarios, rather than appreciating them as distinct talents with different messages. Though their rivalry was never marked by public feuds or direct conflict, it was a quiet, lingering tension. One that reflected not only the competitive nature of the soul music world, but also the emotional cost of being held up as symbols rather than seen as human beings. Aretha Franklin and Diana Ross. were two of the most iconic female voices in American music, but their careers were often cast in a narrative of rivalry, one shaped as much by industry forces and public perception as by personal tension. At the center of this narrative was the title Queen of Soul, a crown Aretha wore with pride and conviction, rooted in her gospel upbringing and raw, emotionally charged performances. Diana Ross, meanwhile, emerged from the Motown machine with a polished pop sensibility, crossover appeal, and a glamorous stage presence that made her a household name far beyond the soul genre. Their perceived rivalry wasn't just about talent, it was about class, style, and authenticity. Aretha's sound was church-born, uncompromising, and deeply tied to the civil rights movement. Ross's rise, particularly with the Supremes, came with a more calculated image, elegant, fashionable, and deliberately crafted for mainstream and white audiences. To some critics and fans, this contrast turned Ross into a symbol of commercial soul, while Aretha stood for its unfiltered truth. The tension between gospel grit and pop gloss became shorthand for a deeper cultural debate within black music. Alleged personal slights over the years only added fuel to the fire. There were rumors of shade thrown at award shows, of cold interactions at industry events, and of strategic snubs in interviews. Some reports even suggested that Franklin bristled at Ross receiving accolades or attention that she felt overlooked her contributions. The press, hungry for headlines and sensationalism, played up these narratives, framing every photo op or red carpet moment as a silent showdown. In truth, the rivalry may have been exaggerated more than enacted, a byproduct of an industry that thrived on comparison and conflict. But the underlying themes were real. Two women navigating a male-dominated business, carrying the weight of representation, and fighting for control over their own legacies. The Aretha Ross dynamic wasn't just about who sang better or sold more records. It was a clash of archetypes in the world of soul, reflecting broader tensions about identity, success, and the limits of how black women were allowed to shine.
But it would be nothing. No!
James Brown, the self-proclaimed godfather of soul, was a revolutionary force in music, a relentless innovator whose impact on soul, funk, and popular culture is immeasurable. But his towering talent came with a domineering personality and an intense drive to remain the singular force in the soul and funk landscape. Brown didn't just want to lead the genre, he wanted to own it. His need to control every aspect of his music and image often translated into personal and professional conflicts, both within his camp and with rising stars who threatened his reign. Brown's treatment of his bandmates was legendary for its harshness. He demanded perfection, fined musicians for missing notes or being late, and ruled his stage with an iron fist. While his discipline helped craft one of the tightest live acts in history, it also created deep resentment among those who worked for him. Many band members came and went, citing mistreatment and lack of credit. This controlling nature extended beyond his own band. Brown was wary of competition and often viewed younger, up-and-coming artists with suspicion or open hostility. As soul evolved and new stars emerged in the late 70s and early 80s, Brown began to see threats to his legacy. Michael Jackson and Prince, in particular, drew comparisons to Brown not only for their musical brilliance and stagecraft, but also for how directly they had been influenced by him. Brown, instead of embracing their success, often responded with envy and veiled criticism. There were instances where he publicly dismissed their talents or insinuated that they were mimicking his moves without giving proper respect. Despite shared admiration and some on-stage collaborations, the underlying friction was unmistakable. These tensions weren't always expressed outright, but Brown's actions and statements suggested a man who struggled with the idea of being surpassed. His refusal to cede the spotlight, even as his commercial relevance waned, made him appear combative and at times out of step. Yet at the same time, His insecurity was human, the inevitable consequence of having built a legacy so immense that any rival seemed like a threat to the throne. Ultimately, James Brown's rivalries weren't limited to just one person. They were with anyone who dared to occupy the space he helped create. His story is a complex mix of brilliance and paranoia, leadership and ego. A man who changed the course of music history but fought desperately to stay ahead of the very wave he inspired. Otis Redding.
Try a little tenderness.
And Sam Cooke.
All the answer, my friend, knowing.
Were both legendary soul singers, but they symbolized very different paths in the genre. Sam Cooke came from a gospel background and used his smooth, controlled voice to break into the pop world. He aimed for crossover success, carefully crafting a polished image that appealed to both black and white audiences. He believed that integration and success could come through refinement and accessibility. Otis Redding, on the other hand, had a rougher, more emotional style. His voice was full of grit and passion, shaped by his southern roots and working-class background. He didn't chase polish. His power came from raw feeling and authenticity. Redding's music felt more grounded in everyday black experience, less concerned with fitting into mainstream expectations. While they respected each other and never directly competed, their different approaches came to represent two sides of a bigger conversation. Should black artists smooth their sound to reach broader audiences, or stay true to a more unfiltered, soulful expression? After both died young, fans and critics often compared their legacies. One was seen as a strategist and pioneer, the other as a pure soul force. Together, they reflect the range and richness of soul music and the tensions that helped define it. Soul music continues to be a powerful force in American culture, a genre born from deep struggle and profound brilliance. Its greatest voices not only shaped the sound of a generation, but also reflected the hopes, pains, and complexities of black life in America. Behind the unforgettable melodies and emotional performances, the rivalries among soul legends offer a more personal, often painful glimpse into the realities they faced, not just as artists, but as individuals navigating an industry built on competition, image, and control. These rivalries weren't just about ego. They were often the result of systemic pressures, from racial barriers to label manipulation, that forced artists to fight for recognition, survival, and legacy. Understanding these tensions doesn't diminish their achievements. It deepens our respect for the burdens they carried and the brilliance they still delivered. In the end, the story of soul music is not just one of sound, but of sacrifice, a legacy of artists who gave everything to their craft even as they wrestled with each other and the world around them. Their music endures, and so does the truth behind it.